sentence was not death by rope. In the dust-whitened square of Red Bluff hanging would have been mercy. The decree came from Crow himself, the man who ruled the town without wearing its crown. His voice carried a syrupy righteousness as he addressed the gathered crowd. No gallows would be raised for her, no quick end granted. Instead, Lyra, the daughter of a Boston bookkeeper, would be handed over to God's verdict. 1 canteen of water, a slab of hardtack, then she would be pointed east toward the burning jaws of the Dragoon Mountains, toward Roanoke, the hunter spoken of in whispers. They were sending her to an Apache blood tracker to die. Arizona Territory, 1878, was a place that rewarded lies and punished truth. Lyra had learned that lesson too well. Truth did not set you free. It buried you. It had begun quietly enough. Her father Quinn, a gentle man with numbers of O's always tucked behind his eyes, had been hired by Crow to straighten the accounts of his sprawling cattle holdings. For nearly a year, life in Red Bluff felt like borrowed calm, a fragile pause after the soot-choked streets of Boston they'd fled following her mother's death. Lyra often worked beside her father, her sharp mind guided by his patience. One night, while comparing Crow's land claims with territorial survey maps, she noticed something wrong. On an older map, folded deep inside a thick leather ledger, faint raised markings revealed a spring, a precious source of water belonging to the Wilder family. But on Crow's official deed, that same spring sat squarely within the borders of his ranch. The Wilders' 4 souls had vanished the year before. Folks said they'd gone west to California. 2 days after Lyra showed the map to her father, Quinn fell violently ill. He was dead before the second sunrise. The town doctor Finch, a man drowning in Crow's debt, called it cholera. Lyra knew better. Her father had been healthy, careful, afraid. She hid the ledger. She understood then, with icy clarity, that Quinn hadn't died of disease. He had died of knowledge. Crow was no benefactor. He was a predator wearing Sunday clothes. He built the church, paid the sheriff, extended credit from his store. In exchange, he demanded silence, and Red Bluff gave it willingly. His shoulders were broad, his eyes cold as riverstone. When Crow realized Lyra had assisted her father, his gaze found her and never left. Desperation drove her next mistake. She tried to sell their small homestead, hoping to escape to Santa Fe. When a freighter named Gus asked about property lines, she mentioned her father's meticulous records. Crow heard of it within the hour. That evening, Carr arrived with 2 deputies. They didn't knock. They tore the cabin apart. The ledger was pulled from beneath the floorboards. The trial was theater. Held in the open air, Crow standing beside the makeshift bench. The verdict was sealed before a word was spoken. He produced a falsified ledger, accused Lyra of forgery, of extortion, of scheming to steal his land. "She is poison," Crow thundered, his voice echoing off adobe walls. "A deceiver from the east here to rot what we've built." A murmur rolled through the crowd. "But we are a God-fearing town," he continued smoothly. "We do not hang women." Approval followed. "We leave her fate to Providence." His smile was thin as a blade. "We send her into the Badlands. If she is innocent, God will guard her from the sun, the snakes, and from Roanoke." A gasp swept through the square. Roanoke. A name spoken like a curse. A story used to frighten children. But this ghost was real. A rogue Apache. The last of his band, they said. A warrior so ruthless his own people had cast him out. They called him the Blood Hunter, a title earned through lone vengeance against prospectors who had slaughtered his family. Sending Lyra into his territory was a death sentence, one that allowed Red Bluff to keep its hands clean. Lyra stood alone, dust clinging to her skin. She searched the faces she once greeted at the market, the blacksmith's wife, the men who shared coffee beside her father. None met her eyes. Silence made them guilty. Carr bound her wrists, shoved the canteen into her hands, stuffed the hardtack into her pocket. "East," he growled. "Just walk east." As Lyra stepped beyond the town's edge, leaving civilization behind, a final whisper drifted on the dry wind. It was Crow speaking to the sheriff. "Make sure no one follows." "Make sure no one follows," Crow muttered. "Let the coyotes and the Apache finish it." Above them, the sun struck like a ruthless hammer. Within the hour, Red Bluff had shrunk to a wavering blur behind Lyra, soon erased by the endless indifference of the Arizona desert. Her world narrowed to the scrape of worn boots against stone, the rasp of breath in her throat, and the crushing heat pressing down without mercy. The land stretched out in shades of rust, dust, and bleached bone. Saguaro cacti rose like twisted sentries, arms lifted toward a pitiless blue sky. Lizards darted across her path, the only living movement, beyond the slow, patient circling of buzzards far above. By midday, half her water was gone. She measured each swallow in maddening drops, barely enough to wet her tongue before vanishing. Books numbers the lessons of Boston. All of it meant nothing here. This land obeyed a harsher arithmetic, the sun's angle, the distance between shadows, the steady shrinking of water. Fear settled deep and cold in her gut. Ronak, the blood hunter, stalked her thoughts. Every dark shape ahead looked like a waiting figure carved from stone. Wind whispered through thorn and brush, sounding too much like footsteps. She had been a city girl, tossed into a wilderness that wanted her dead, and she knew it. Yet beneath the terror, a stubborn ember burned her father's resolve. Quinn had not raised a daughter to surrender. Survive now. Justice later. She repeated the words silently as the first day bled into a night that offered no relief. The heat vanished after sunset, replaced by a biting cold. The desert that had tried to burn her alive now sought to freeze her still. Lyra crouched behind boulders, shaking, listening to coyotes calling in the dark, too close for comfort. She forced down the last of the hardtack, the crumbs tearing at her throat. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by Crow's dead eyes and the faces of Red Bluff turned away. Day 2 arrived like punishment. By noon the canteen was empty, her lips split. Her tongue swelled until every breath hurt. The world swayed. The mountains ahead seemed to retreat with every step. She slipped her ankle, twisting hard on loose stone. Pain flared white-hot. She lay in the dust, the sun pressing down on her spine. This was it. This was the judgment Crow had promised, a slow execution, written in heat and thirst. Tears cut pale tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She thought of her father's steady hands, his quiet strength and loneliness, crashed over her like a wave. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself upright. Stopping meant dying. She limped on sight, blurring thoughts, dissolving into thirst and pain. Light fractured into glare and shadow. Late afternoon brought something new, not a man, but his mark. A single dark feather, bound with sinew to a dead mesquite branch. A warning. She had crossed into his land. Fear sharpened from a dull ache into something keen and cutting. Still she moved, driven by instinct, until her strength failed. The desert floor rose into broken canyons and hidden cuts. She staggered into the narrow shade beneath towering stone, a brief shelter from the sun. Her legs buckled. Lyra fell onto cool sand, her mind unraveling. Her final clear thought was not of Crow nor justice, but of a life never lived. Time vanished. Minutes or hours passed unseen. A shadow touched her. Her eyes fluttered open. A man stood over her, tall, lean, shaped by muscle hardened under desert sun, copper skin, long black hair bound by a simple leather band, buckskin leggings, a worn breechcloth. Scars traced his bare arms and chest like old stories. His face was sharp, unmoving, but his eyes held her, dark, alert, measuring. Not cruel, not kind, simply absolute. In his hand was no blade, no bow, only a small clay jug. This was him, Ronak. She had been sent here to die. Lyra closed her eyes, too weak to shake, waiting for the end. It did not come. Instead, steady hands lifted her head. His movements were calm, precise. The jug touched her lips, and the scent of cool water, clean, impossible, filled her senses, richer than any perfume she had ever known. Water flowed. "Neju," he said. The sound was rough and low, yet gentle. Water slid past her lips. Lyra gulped it too fast, choking. He pulled the jug away, at once waited, then returned it. This time he guided her, allowing only slow, careful mouthfuls until the burning in her throat eased. This was Ronak. The creature Red Bluff had painted as a monster, moved with unexpected care. His hands were steady, deliberate. He tested her twisted ankle with skilled pressure fingers, reading the swelling without causing pain. His gaze moved to her blistered skin, the dust caked along her face. His expression revealed nothing. Not mercy, not anger, not curiosity. Only a deep stillness like water lying untouched in a desert basin at night. Then with effortless strength he lifted her. Lyra was too weak to resist, too dazed to understand. The feared Apache killer carried her as one would a child. He moved through the canyon with silent ease, his moccasined feet never scraping stone. He did not pass through the land. He belonged to it. His dwelling was no crude shelter or cave. It was a refuge. Hidden within a folded hollow of the canyon, shielded by ancient twisted cottonwoods, lay a small, carefully kept camp. A narrow stream, the one marked on Quinn's map, ran nearby, feeding a strip of green where corn and squash thrived. At its center stood a wickiup, round and low-built, of branches and hide. Peace lived there, a world apart from the screaming emptiness she had crossed. Ronak laid her gently on furs inside the shelter. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth herbs and old smoke. He left, briefly returning with a wooden bowl filled with crushed leaves. The poultice spread cool against her ankle, calming the deep ache. Fever followed. For days, Lyra drifted in and out of broken sleep. Her world became fragments, thin broth at her lips, a cool cloth on her brow, the low rhythm of Ronak's voice, murmuring words she could not understand. The sound did not frighten her. When the fever, finally, loosened its grip, she woke to find him sitting near the fire pit, outside repairing leather. The sun sank behind canyon walls painted in orange and violet. He noticed her stir, nodded once, and returned to his work. There was no warmth between them, no threat either, only watchful quiet. Ronak spoke little. He brought her food, roasted rabbit ground meal baked into cakes, sweet squash softened by fire. He gave her water drawn fresh from the stream. Each day he tended her ankle. He offered safety without question. He never asked her name, never asked where she came from. He spoke no English. They spoke instead with hands and glances, nods for yes, stillness for no. He pointed to water, to fire, ko. She repeated the sounds, learning quickly. Her name, Lyra, meant nothing here. One day, as she stitched a torn seam with a needle and thread he had given her, he watched in silence. Then he pointed to her and said a single word. Atsa. Needle. It became her name within the canyon. She later learned his was not the name spoken in Red Bluff. Ronak was the truth. What they called him was a distortion, a white man's word for cutting. His name meant something else. Ali. Friend. The bitterness of it nearly made her smile. To the world beyond the canyon, he was a killer, a shadow, a thing to fear. But here alone he was healer and guardian. He showed more humanity in silence than Red Bluff ever had with its sermons. One evening, as she watched him carve wood by the fire, memory surged back without warning. The accusations, the crowd, the helplessness. A sound escaped her before she could stop it. Ronak paused. He looked at her eyes steady. He did not reach for her, did not speak. He stayed where he was, bearing witness. In that stillness, she found comfort. As if he understood, some wounds did not want words, only space to exist. Lyra realized then she was not his captive. She was his guest. And for the first time since Quinn died, she was not alone. Weeks passed. Summer's fury softened into autumn air. Her ankle healed, leaving only a dull ache when the nights cooled. Burned skin peeled, replaced by bronze warmth. Strength returned. She worked beside Ronak, tending the small garden, gathering herbs, checking snares, learning the rhythm of the canyon that had spared her life. She learned how the canyon spoke. A hawk's cry meant prey was close. Leaves shifting a certain way warned of a snake moving unseen. She learned silence not as emptiness, but as awareness, a way of hearing what most people missed. Ronak remained a mystery. His life was ruled by discipline and quiet ritual. Each dawn, he faced the rising sun in wordless stillness. Every movement carried purpose. Nothing was wasted, not effort, not food, not breath. He was a hunter without question. She watched the lethal calm with which he drew his bow, the certainty of his aim. Yet he was also a guardian. He took only what the land allowed and honored every animal he killed with a gravity she had never known. The ledger stayed pressed against her body, hidden in the bodice of her dress, a constant reminder of why she had been cast out, the proof of Crow's crimes. One night, trust finally outweighing fear, she chose to show it to him. They sat near the fire flames, throwing restless shadows across the stone walls. Her hands shook as she pulled free the battered leather book and opened it. The pages were filled with Quinn's careful handwriting, steady and exact. She lacked the words to explain forged deeds and stolen land, so she pointed instead. She traced the name Crow written again and again, then curved her fingers like a striking snake, hissing softly. Crude, childish, but enough. Ronak took the ledger. He handled it with unexpected respect. He did not read the numbers or the script. His gaze fixed on a single detail, a small stamped mark on the inside cover, a broken circle enclosing a letter, Crow's brand. Something in him changed. The calm that defined him fractured. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped beneath his cheek. His eyes, usually still, flared with an ancient cold fire. He touched the symbol and whispered a word thick with bitterness. Baleshe. Red sleeves. It was what his people called U.S. soldiers, but this word carried a deeper meaning. A name reserved for slaughterers. Ronak rose and moved to the rear of the wickiup, returning with a deer-hide bundle bound in sinew. He knelt and opened it between them. Inside lay a few treasured things, turquoise beads, flint and steel, and a single tarnished silver locket. He opened it. One side held a faded image of a young Apache woman, her eyes alive with warmth. The other cradled a pressed desert marigold. Then, using a charred stick, he began to draw in the sand. He told his story without words. He sketched a canyon like this one, only larger. He drew many homes, a village. He added women, elders, children. His people. He drew himself younger beside the woman from the locket, Asha. A small figure stood between them, Toma. Then came horses. Men. Rifles. On one horse's flank he carved the same brand from the ledger. With one sweeping motion, he erased the village. Fire followed. Bodies. One bearded man standing above the ruin, a cavalry saber in hand. Ronak looked at Lyra. His grief was raw, almost visible. He drew himself alone among rocks, watching helplessly. He had been away hunting when it happened. It had not been war. It had been slaughter. The attackers were not soldiers in uniform, but ranchers and prospectors a mob granted authority to clear the land. They were led by a man who wanted the canyon's water for his cattle, who used a rumor of theft as an excuse for annihilation. His name was Var, father of Crow. Ronak had lived, and afterward he hunted. For 2 years he tracked those he could identify. That was how the name Blood Hunter was born, not from pride but from grief. When the last debt was paid in blood, He withdrew to this canyon, choosing exile over a world that had already taken everything. Lyra stared at the drawings, then at the ledger resting in her lap. Understanding struck like a blow. This was never just about the Wilder Spring. The book was a record of an empire Crow's empire built, piece by piece on stolen land, legalized through lies and forged ink. Quinn had not uncovered a single crime. He had exposed the foundation of them all. She had uncovered the original crime that Red Bluff was built upon. Crow was not merely a land-hungry rancher. He was the heir of a butcher, guarding a dynasty rooted in blood and forgery. Lyra studied Roanoke. The calm mask settled once more over his face, sealing away a lifetime of buried pain. They were mirrors of one another, she realized. Both had survived Crow's world. Both were ghosts, shaped by injustice, done to their families, left to wander with the weight of it. The truth between them needed no words. It lay stark in the firelight. This was no longer Lyra's battle alone. Back in Red Bluff, Crow's patience had thinned. Weeks dragged on, and the desert offered nothing. No bleached bones, no rumors carried back by prospectors. No traveler spoke of a woman's spirit roaming the Badlands. Silence frayed him. Loose ends always did. Crow stood on the wide porch of his ranch house, eyes fixed east on the jagged teeth of the Dragoon Mountains. The ledger Lyra carried was wrought in the bone. It wasn't only the Wilder Spring, it catalogued a dozen thefts just as brutal. If that book ever reached a marshal with a backbone, everything Crow owned could collapse. "She's dead," Carr insisted, mopping sweat from his brow. "Nothing survives out there. Nothing but him," Crow replied softly. "And that's the problem." Carr shifted. "He's always been a loose end." Crow drew on his cigar, the ember burning like a wicked eye. "My father should have finished it years ago. I want proof. Her body or that book, preferably both." Carr hesitated. "Who's foolish enough to ride into Roanoke's country?" Crow smiled, thin and cold. "I know the man. His name was Rusk. Not a ranch hand. Not a common gun." Rusk was Crow's hound, gaunt, leather-hard eyes, empty as weathered stone. He was a tracker feared across the territory. Folks said he could follow a whisper across rock. He had scouted for the army during the Apache campaigns, learning their ways only to twist them back. He hunted men for pay. He hunted Apaches for sport. When Crow named the price, even Rusk paused. "Find the girl," Crow said. "If the Apache's with her, kill them both. Burn whatever hole they're hiding in. Bring me that ledger." Rusk nodded, took the money and rode out at dawn with a handful of the Crow riders. He insisted on taking a deputy along. Young Hale and Crow allowed it. A badge made everything cleaner if questions arose. Hale, eager and green, rode with them without protest. In the canyon, unease crept into the rhythm of days. Roanoke grew alert and his senses honed sharp. One morning he returned from a high ridge expression hard. He knelt and sketched in the dirt 5 riders, one leading the others, following a trail. Her trail. Cold flooded Lyra's veins. They had come for her. Crow had not trusted the desert to finish the work. "They won't find this place," Roanoke said, one of the few full sentences she'd ever heard from him. His voice was low, steady. "The canyon keeps its own secrets." Yet tension flickered in his eyes. He knew who Crow would send. Few white men could read the land as he did, but one could. Ardoazji, the stalker, Rusk. The hunter was now the prey. Roanoke began to ready himself. The quiet guardian fell away, replaced by the warrior who had survived slaughter. His movements sharpened. He tested his bowstring, chose arrows with care, checked each point and feather. He packed dried meat, a water skin, and the small deer-hide bundle of his past. "We go," he said, simply pointing not away from the riders, but deeper into the tangled spine of the dragoons. "Let the mountain hunt." Weeks ago, fear would have frozen Lyra in place. Now something steadier rose within her. She was no longer the woman driven from Red Bluff. The desert had stripped away her panic and left strength in its place. She would not slow him down. She gathered what little she owned, heart beating firm and sure. She was done being prey. She had survived once. She intended to keep surviving by any means she could. As they left the hidden camp that had saved her life, Lyra took one last look at the small garden and the wickiup tucked into the canyon wall. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that their brief season of peace had ended. The violence of Crow's world had reached them. From now on, safety lived only in motion. Flight became a harsh lesson in disappearing. Rusk was every bit the tracker people feared, patient, ruthless, intelligent. He followed the trail Lyra had left days earlier with unnerving accuracy. But Ronak was not following tracks. He was reading what Rusk could not see. Wind patterns, bird calls, the faint language of stone and slope. Ronak guided Lyra through routes that were barely there, across sheer rock faces that defied reason, through narrow slot canyons where stone pressed in close enough to touch both sides at once. He taught her how to step on rock without leaving a mark, how to erase footprints with a branch, how to let sun and shadow hide her shape. Weeks in the canyon had hardened her body. She learned to climb, to endure, to remain still for hours. Fear never left her. It settled low and cold, but now it served her. It sharpened her senses, kept her awake to every sound. Days dissolved into whispered movement and long watchful nights. From high ledges they watched Rusk and the Crow riders, far below the men, crawling across the land like angry insects. Too close. Always too close. Then came the trap. They hid in a shallow cave along a cliff face as this posse made camp directly beneath them. One loose stone would mean death. They lay pressed to cold rock through the night, and most of the next day listening to the men's voices echo below. It was there that Lyra noticed the fracture forming among them. Hale, the young deputy, was uneasy. While Rusk and the others spoke freely of killing the Apache and reclaiming Crow's property, Hale stayed quiet. He tended the horse's doubt written across his face. He had sworn to uphold the law, not to ride with a private execution party. Rusk, however, was alive with purpose. "He's here," Rusk rasped his voice, carrying upward on the still air. "I can smell him. He thinks the mountain will protect him. But this mountain belongs to me now." As the sun sank on the second day, Ronak knew waiting longer meant death. Morning light would expose them. He signaled Lyra to stay. Then, as silently as shadow slipping from stone, he disappeared from the cave. Lyra barely breathed. Her heart pounded until time lost meaning. Below, a horse whinnied sharp, frightened. Then another. A sudden shout broke the stillness. From her vantage point, Lyra watched chaos unfold. The posse's horses, tethered together, suddenly bolted, scattering in all directions, spooked by something unseen. Men cursed and ran scrambling to regain control. In the confusion, Ronak reappeared beside her, silent, composed. He had engineered the escape without drawing a bow, without spilling blood. They moved fast, using darkness and disorder to vanish along the ridge. The incident stayed with Hale. In the fading light he had glimpsed movement, not animal, not chance, something deliberate, purposeful. He saw the obsession burning in Rusk's eyes and understood the truth. This was not justice. It was a vendetta. The next day, while the posse struggled to recover their scattered mounts, Hale wandered into a manzanita thicket to retrieve a stray mare. There in the dust he saw it, a fresh moccasin print pointing west. He followed the direction with his eyes. Then he looked back toward Rusk. With his boot he scuffed the mark away. It was a small act, quiet. But in the deadly game unfolding in the mountains, it mattered. Unaware of their unseen ally, Ronak and Lyra continued their flight. Yet Ronak understood the truth. Running would not end this. Rusk would never stop. The mountain could hide them, but it could also bury them. This fight could not be finished here. It had to be carried back to the source. Back to Red Bluff. The decision chilled them both. For Lyra, Red Bluff was where she had been judged and cast out. Returning meant stepping willingly into the jaws of the beast. For Roanoke, any white settlement was enemy groundland, soaked in betrayal and broken words. Still, the path was clear. If the poison had a heart, that was where it beat. They both understood there was no other path. Rot could not be cleansed from the edges. It had to be cut out at the heart. They turned north, skirting the mountains in a long, punishing arc toward the high desert plateau where Red Bluff lay. This was no longer flight. It was a deliberate return. They needed help, someone rooted inside the world they meant to confront. Roanoke knew one man. Pike lived on the margins, disliked by the town, yet tolerated for his skill. A grizzled prospector who had worked the Dragoon claims for 2 decades, Pike was stubborn, sharp-tongued, and fiercely independent. Most important of all, he despised Crow. Years earlier, Crow had stolen a rich silver claim from him through forged filings and quiet threats, leaving Pike with nothing but worthless stone and a hatred that never cooled. They found his camp hidden in a narrow arroyo, tools scattered, pack mules tied in disarray. Pike, lean and wild-bearded eyes faded, like old denim, greeted them with a shotgun leveled straight at their chests. Far enough, he rasped, spitting tobacco. Roanoke lifted an open hand and spoke Pike's name. The prospector squinted, lowering the gun a fraction. "I'll be damned," Pike muttered. "The mountain ghost. Heard you were dead, heard it plenty." His gaze shifted to Lyra. "And you were supposed to be coyote feed." Lyra stepped forward. "Mr. Pike, my name is Lyra. Crow sent me into the desert to die. This man saved me. We need your help." Pike studied them, saw the exhaustion, the resolve, the ledger tucked beneath her arm. "Crow," he growled, the name bitter. Anything that puts a thorn under that bastard's saddle suits me fine. Get in." Inside his dusty, cluttered tent, they laid it out. Lyra told of the ledger, Quinn's discovery, and the fate of the Wilder family. Roanoke, in sparse but steady English, spoke of the massacre led by Var, tying Crow's legacy directly to the brand stamped in the book. Pike's face darkened with every word. He traced the map inside the ledger with a dirty finger. "Knew it," he whispered. "Old Wilder wouldn't have walked away from that spring. Water's worth more than gold out here." He looked up. "So what, you stroll into town and call Crow out? He'll have you shot before you finish breathing." "We need the truth in front of everyone," Lyra said. "Not just Crow's people. The freighters, the farmers, the ones he doesn't own." An idea took shape. Pike knew that the following week Judge Cole was due for his semi-annual visit to Red Bluff. Crow always turned it into a spectacle, a public luncheon in the plaza, all smiles and civic pride. It would be the one moment the town and an official authority gathered together, their only opening. The plan was reckless. Pike would ride into town claiming he'd struck a massive silver vein. He'd buy drinks for the saloon, stir excitement, draw a crowd for the judge's arrival. Chaos would be cover. Meanwhile, an unlikely ally acted. Hale, having led Rusk and the posse on a useless chase based on his mistaken reading of tracks, finally declared the trail cold. He returned to town with a furious, suspicious Rusk. That night, burdened by conscience, Hale sought out Martha, the stern boarding-house keeper, who had once been close to Quinn. In a hushed voice, he confessed everything. Martha listened. She had never believed Quinn's death was natural. The next day, under the excuse of buying supplies, Hale rode out beyond town. Pike, tipped off by Martha, met him. The tension was sharp. "A lawman, a conspirator. I swore an oath," Hale said, jaw set. "Not to Crow, to the law. Tell me what you need." The final pieces locked into place. Hale would keep Carr and Crow's men distracted during the luncheon. Pike would whip the crowd into a frenzy. Lyra, disguised as Pike's timid niece, would walk straight into the plaza that had condemned her. Roanoke would be unseen, a shadow on the rooftops, bow ready, watching everything. It was a desperate wager, one roll of the dice against a man who owned the table. As they set the final pieces in place, a fragile hope began to glow brighter than fear. In the Wild West, even in a town that called itself Red Bluff Truth, when carried with enough courage, could still be the sharpest weapon of all. The morning Judge Cole arrived dawned clear and hard with sunlight. Red Bluff buzzed with near festive energy. Pike had done his work well. Talk of his silver strike filled every corner of town, and the saloon had been overflowing since the night before. Between the promise of Crow's free luncheon and the judge's visit, nearly everyone crowded into the central plaza. Lyra stood at the edge of town, her heart beating wild against her ribs. She wore a borrowed plain dress and a wide bonnet pulled low to shadow her face. Beside her, Pike gave a subtle nod. "Just a scared little church mouse," he murmured. "Nobody'll give you a second look." They slipped into the crowd. Lyra kept her head down, eyes sharp. She spotted Crow, polished and smug in a fine suit, laughing beside Judge Cole, a heavy-set man with a gold watch chain stretched across his vest. She saw Carr puffed up and officious, barking orders. And she saw Rusk leaning against the general store post, pale eyes sweeping the plaza without missing a thing. Crow's watchdog. She flicked her gaze to the flat roof of the livery stable. A shadow shifted, then stilled. Roanoke was in position. The luncheon began. Crow mounted the makeshift platform, smiling like a man carved from civic virtue. "Welcome, Judge Cole. Welcome, friends and neighbors," he boomed. "Days like this remind us of the prosperity and order we've built together under the watchful eye of the law." That word law was the signal. A voice thundered from the crowd. Finn, red-faced and furious, shoved forward. "What law is that, Crow? The one that lets you steal a man's land and his water." Silence slammed down. Crow's smile faltered. "Finn, you've had too much of your own celebratory whiskey. Don't make a fool of yourself in front of the judge." "The only fools left," Finn snapped, "are the ones still swallowing your lies." Right on cue, Hale shouted from the far end of the street. Sheriff Big Brawl at the saloon freighters, swinging axe handles. Grateful for escape, Carr spun on his heel. "I'll handle it," he barked, hustling off with his deputies. Crow stood exposed save for his wolf. He signaled Rusk, but before the tracker moved, Lyra stepped out from behind Finn and pulled off her bonnet. A gasp tore through the plaza. "It's the Bell girl," someone shouted. "She's alive." Lyra walked toward the platform, steady and unflinching. Crow's face drained of color, his confidence cracking. Impossible. She was meant to be dust. "You're right, Mr. Crow," Lyra said, her voice carrying clean and strong across the square. "We did build something here. Your family built an empire." She raised the leather ledger. "And this is how you built it." She opened the book. The Wilder Spring, taken after the family vanished. Pike's silver claim, rewritten on your deeds. Dozens of families forced out, bought cheap, or erased altogether. She lifted her eyes to him. "All written in my father Quinn's hand, the man you poisoned when he learned the truth." "Lies," Crow spat, face blotchy with rage. "This woman's a criminal. A fraud. Rusk, arrest her." Rusk stepped forward, hand dropping to his pistol. Then a figure dropped soundlessly from the rooftop. Roanoke emerged from the alley behind the stage and stepped into the sun. He carried no bow, only a tarnished silver locket. The crowd recoiled. The blood hunter of their nightmares stood in the heart of their town. Not a monster, just a man. His face held grief and iron resolve in equal measure. Roanoke mounted the platform, eyes locked on Crow. "Your father," he said, his English precise and edged with old hatred. "Var Crow led the men who murdered my people, my wife Asha, my son Toma." He held up the locket. "He did it for water, so his cattle could drink. He signed the crime with his brand." Roanoke pointed at Crow. "The same brand in that book. The same mark that built this town on our graves. Silence crushed the plaza. The ledger in Lyra's hands and the testimony of the man they had feared fused into one brutal truth. The people of Red Bluff stared at Crow, not with loyalty or fear anymore, but with revulsion and dawning understanding. Judge Cole, face hard as stone, stepped forward. "Mr. Crow," Judge Cole said, his voice sharp with frost, "these are the gravest accusations I have ever heard. You will surrender that ledger, miss, and you, sir, are hereby placed under arrest pending a full inquiry by the territorial marshal." Crow stood trapped. The authority he'd built on fear and spectacle collapsed in the open sun. In a last frantic gamble, he shrieked, "Kill them! Rusk, kill them all!" Rusk's hand flew to his gun. Before he could raise it, a clear voice cut the air. "No!" Hale stepped between Rusk and the stage, his own pistol drawn steady. "It's over, Rusk. The law's here now, the real law." For a breath, the two men faced each other. Rusk's dead eyes flickered surprise, then contempt. He shifted, choosing the easier target. The air hissed. A black-fletched arrow flashed from the roof of the general store and slammed into Rusk's gun hand. He screamed, the pistol clattering to the boards as blood poured from his shattered wrist. Pike had seen to it that Roanoke carried a second bow. It was finished. The crowd surged forward, fear-broken. They closed in on Crow, faces set with betrayal. Hale snapped irons on him, his voice ringing with a confidence newly earned. Reckoning came to Red Bluff. In the days that followed, truth did what bullets never could. It scoured the town clean. Judge Cole's investigation, guided by the precise records in Quinn's ledger, dismantled Crow's empire piece by piece. Crow was sentenced to life at the territorial prison in Yuma, a punishment many judged worse than the rope. Stolen lands were returned where possible or open to honest settlement. Red Bluff began the slow, painful work of living up to its name. Hale became Sheriff Hale, respected for courage and integrity. Pike recovered his silver claim at last, though he liked to say his greatest treasure was the look on Crow's face when the truth landed. Lyra did not stay. She had cleared her father's name and brought his killer to justice, but the town held too many ghosts. Before leaving, she walked to the edge of the desert. Roanoke waited there, a quiet silhouette against the setting sun. There were no speeches. Words were too small for what they shared. He placed the silver locket in her hand. A keepsake, a memory. She nodded, a promise passing between them. Then he turned and went back into the mountains, the ghost returning to his sanctuary, his long war finally ended. If this story of survival and an unlikely alliance that toppled a tyrant moved you, consider sharing it with someone who values a true tale of the Old West. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, courage, and the hidden heroes of the American frontier. Thank you for listening. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work